Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Festival of Trusteeship session from Eastside People. This session is how to build your confidence as a trustee. I'm Penny, I'm the Festival Director at Eastside People, and before I hand over to Anj Handa, who's chairing our panel, I'm just going to share a bit of housekeeping information with you. You will have seen that the session is being recorded. If you've booked this session as a single session, you will get the recording within the next day or so. If you're a weekly pass holder, you'll get all 15 recordings shortly after the festival on one message. You've been muted automatically on arrival. Please stay muted unless Anj comes to you for a question. If you do speak, you will be on the recording. Closed captions are available, so if you'd like the subtitles, please click CC or closed captions on your device. Please absolutely use the chat to introduce yourselves, to ask questions of the panel, to share your experiences, to share reflections, to share resources. Having said that, some of our chats get very, very, very busy. So if you prefer to completely ignore the chat, Anj will always read a question out in full if she's taking it from the chat. And when you get the recording, the chat will be included. So if there's things like resources and links that are useful, you will get those with the recording. If you don't already have one, you can still purchase a weekly pass. They're £30 for all 15 recordings from the week and for access to tomorrow's events as well. A massive thank you to the Institute of Leadership. Their headline support means that we can offer this free strand for aspiring trustees and make the rest of the festival very accessible, which has really been reflected in our numbers. So thank you. And thank you to this brilliant bunch of other organisations who have supported us. And then two final bits of housekeeping. One is that this session is very much in the public domain, so please don't put anything in the chat that you wouldn't want to be made public. And secondly, I don't think we will be talking about legalities particularly, but please check, as rules are different in England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. So just a note to check with your local regulator, including for aspiring trustees, you might want to check which regulator you're living under. So thank you very much, and over to Anj Handa to chair the session.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming along. And I can already see that we have 75 people in attendance. So what a great turnout this evening. I'm going to keep introductions short. I'll introduce myself first and then each of our four panelists who you can see on screen. And then we're going to move right through to the questions. As Penny has said, if a question is, if we're going to invite you to have your question read out, then I will read that out in full, and I'll pick those up as we go along. I believe that the chat has been very, very busy in previous sessions, so we will only be able to answer a few of those, and apologies in advance, but I hope you get loads out of this session today. My name is Anj Handa, as you can see on screen. I'm the founder of Inspiring Women Changemakers. It's a community of changemakers of all genders who advocate for fairness and safety for women. I'm also a consultant and I work with boards on good governance and diversity, equity and inclusion. I've been on boards for about 20 years. Most recent roles were I was chair of a search and nominations committee of a university and independent governor for 8 years, and the chair of an Arts Council England national portfolio organisation. And I've been on boards for around 20 years now and very much enjoy facilitating panels like these. So first on my screen, we have Jack Taylor, who is currently a trustee at St John of God Hospitaller Services and Hubbub. I hope I said that correctly, Jack. We have Lucy Caldicott, who is about to start at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation Charitable Trust early next year. So congratulations to you, Lucy. We have Gulshun, who is on the board of Ramblers and was previously, most recently, with the East End Women's Museum. And we have Maddy Gazzard, who's at Boxing Futures and Oxfordshire Community Foundation. I'm sure they'll tell us a bit more about their roles as we go along throughout today. So I'm going to move on, as I said, straight to the questions. And the first question that I have is for Jack. So Jack, you became a trustee at 22. You've spoken about being comfortable, not being an expert in everything when we've had some email conversations. How did you develop that confidence, especially in grant making context? Because grant making typically has older boards, and that representation from younger trustees is not always there in my experience. And what advice would you give to newer trustees who feel the pressure of it all?
I think certainly I still don't know it all. That helps immensely. I don't pretend to do so. But I think essentially it's recognizing, for me, I was very fortunate to have a board that was really supportive, and they wanted me on their board because they were lacking in diversity. They wanted a young person who had that experience of youth projects and could bring that. And I think that when you are brought in with a singular specialism, so to speak, of being the what they would call the token young person, which is always good fun. But I quickly realized that boards are meant to be the sum of their parts, and there's a reason you are not a singular person. And being comfortable saying, I bring this, I don't have to bring everything, meant that you can feel more comfortable. I think particularly when it comes to grant making, because you are by definition scrutinizing applications from organizations in sectors that you may have never even touched. And I think for any newer trustees coming into a context, you will be part of a conversation, no doubt, in your second or third year, where you'll do a skills audit and you seek a trustee with a particular focus or specialism and say, we need someone with this. And the inherent inferred part of that is you are not looking for a generalist, and you're not looking for someone who knows everything. You are looking for someone who can bring one or two things. And as long as you bring those one or two things that's all a board can really ask for.
Yeah, I love that response, Jack. And I think just to highlight for our listeners that collective decision making that you touched on. So you're not alone on a board. You might be bringing that particular specialism, but you are making those decisions as a group of trustees, and that's really important for people who are maybe not on boards or who are starting out, to give them the confidence to know that. Is there anything else you'd like to add? So, in terms of advice that you'd give to newer trustees who are maybe feeling the pressure?
I think it's also recognizing you don't need to treat the board meeting as the set piece. You can use the chairs and vice chairs and committee chairs, and my first trusteeship had 1.5 staff. So I would say use the EMT or the SMT, but it's difficult to ever say that in a combat context. But kind of saying to a chair, I've just got a couple of questions on the papers. I don't want to ask silly questions in the board. Can I just talk to you bilaterally before a meeting is really useful? Or sometimes just saying to your chair afterwards, can I just ask how you thought that went and whether there's any way I can improve? It is a development role always, and if you stop learning for any trustee, you're in danger of being the discussion point for tomorrow's session on how to be a trustee. But I think in that context, it's just ensuring that you are continually comfortable with saying, I'm here to fill a role. That role is important, and it's for people who aren't in the room. I need to ensure that I'm doing my best part there, but part of that is looking for feedback continually.
Yeah, some great points there. And getting that support from the chair, particularly knowing who to go to when you first joined a trustee board. So I'm not going to SMT, the senior management team, every time, but also accessing the expertise or the support of other trustees. Thank you. Some brilliant points. Maddy, I could see you really nodding away there when Jack was speaking. So you've, when we contacted each other, you talked about imposter syndrome when you joined Boxing Futures, one of your trusteeships, as a young trustee as well, alongside more experienced people. So what specific strategies helped you recognise and own what you have to offer? Because you've obviously gone on since to join Oxfordshire Community Foundation, so it'd be good to understand that.
Yeah, and I think some of it relates really closely to what Jack said actually about knowing your purpose on the board. I think for me, I was specifically recruited to come in as a fundraising trustee. Lots of charities out there looking for fundraising trustees. And so I think it helped me to understand that that was part of the remit I was going to be looking at and focusing on. But I think it did almost make me a bit nervous as well, because I felt like I was being treated like an expert, and recognized that I was a young trustee and I was also, young in my career. So it's kind of very nice to be treated like you've got value to add, but also a bit daunting to think, am I actually the person in the room who is maybe the one who has most experience of this, because even my experience isn't perhaps that much. But I think part of it was around actually listening, welcoming people, being so inquisitive and wanting to hear your opinions, and trusting in myself to think, actually, these questions don't completely flummox me. I can provide responses to them. Or if I don't want to say, after one question in a board meeting, what the answer to the whole fundraising strategy is, I can take questions away and have a think about it. And as Jack said, I think so much of it is not just putting that pressure on the board meetings, but thinking this is a kind of ongoing commitment to supporting the charity, and it isn't all about, gosh, I've got a couple of hours to make an impact.
Yeah, that's a valuable point there that some might struggle with, though. I think being able to feel confident enough to take some questions away to reflect on, particularly when you're experiencing imposter syndrome and there's some aspect of people pleasing. What helped? Was there something that helped you to be able to do that?
I think partly it was practicing, there's that first meeting, and also building relationships with the team. Because again, I think that the board meeting can feel like quite a high pressure place to be giving that advice and to be having those comments. But I think building relationships with the staff team and being able to have conversations aside from it, so that you build that trust amongst people and realize that everybody's kind of working through things together as well. It's not like any of us really know everything. And so I think that, and also just being as prepared as possible, I suppose, going to meetings, having read papers, having thought about key questions, having thought, what is likely to come up, particularly within my area of specialism. Are there things that trustees are likely to be interested in terms of the fundraising, or trying to be a bit front-footed on that where possible. Of course, there's always going to be curveballs, but I know for me, feeling confident in the papers is helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And I just want to pause a moment, because I know there were likely to be some very small or startup charities on today's Zoom who do not have a single member of staff, or they maybe have one or a part-time member of staff. And this is really where leaning into the support from other trustees really come into play, and building those relationships with your fellow trustees and using each other as a sounding board. Thank you so much for that, Maddy. So Lucy, you have experience at both sides of the table as a trustee and a CEO, don't you? How do you approach speaking up or navigating difficult conversations with confidence? And what have you learned about doing that effectively as a consultant? I know that you go out and that you now support other organisations. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. I when I reflected preparing for this, I think I've been in so many difficult conversations over the years, and so reflecting on my learnings from navigating those has been really interesting. And I think as the years have gone by, I guess I've become more comfortable in discomfort. So I'm less fazed now by different opinions around the room, different dynamics, people expressing themselves in sometimes difficult ways. But I think what I have changed is that I I would be less able to tolerate disrespect or poor behaviour. And as I reflect back on my younger days, so I was a trustee in my late 20s for a very small local charity that was going through financial difficulties, staff change, all kinds of difficult times. And there were some bad behaviours around the place, around the trustee board. And I frankly was too scared to speak up. And I think as I look back, I think if I had said things, I wouldn't have been alone in thinking that was not correct behaviour. But at the time, I just sort of sat there in silence, and I feel ashamed actually of that as I look back. I think part of your question was preparing for those difficult conversations, and I think what I've learned to do is to really think through how you hear all of the different perspectives, how you make, so younger me, you know, if that chair had been effective, they would have maybe asked me to contribute. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of making sure that the silent ones are putting their voice across, making sure it's an atmosphere of safety, that people feel able to contribute, and navigating decision making in a way that brings everybody with you. So it's not a, you know, somebody loses and somebody wins. It's a collective decision. So those are some of the things I'd reflect on.
Fantastic. What I heard from that was setting boundaries, something around values as well. And maybe in our conversation as we go on, we can pick up on some of those themes, and speaking up ourselves, being confident to speak up. And I notice in the chat, we have a question. I wonder what bad behaviour on a board of trustees looks like. I'm going to come to all of you after I've spoken with Gulshun about some of these examples, you know, around the moment in your trustee journey where you felt out of your depth or uncertain. So that was a great example, you know, staying silent. I'll share one reflection as a charity chair, you know, coming in and the charity no longer exists, so we can't identify the individual concerned, but they were rude, they were persistently late, they were not prepared, didn't read the board papers, disruptive, you know, talking over people when they were trying to make a point, generally quite bullying behaviour, and that is not untypical. So Lucy, you talked about feeling safe. You said something about safety. I can't remember your exact words, but cultural and psychological safety on a board helps you to feel more confident. So how can we as trustees ensure that each other feel more confident to be able to speak up, and that we've got each other's back? So do you want to just add something briefly on that before I come over to Gulshun?
Yes, I think for I suppose the values of the organisation to be sort of permeated at the way that board works. So most charity would have a set of values that they work towards, either implicit or mostly, you know, often written down. So it would be about setting the tone as a board of trustees. How do we work together? And often there'll be words around respect, you know, treating each other, you know, sort of valuing each other. And so I think it's really setting that framework so that you can work within that. There's a guide for how we want to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And things like codes of conduct on the board can help if a board doesn't have one. Putting that in, again, that can give people confidence to say, I have observed this, and use the code of conduct as a framework. So thank you so much for those perspectives. Gulshun, you've highlighted the importance of structured support, and I've just mentioned one example, things like code of conduct, particularly for trustees from underrepresented backgrounds. Can you contrast your experience with the Ramblers, which is clearly a well-known larger charity, with smaller organisations that I know you've been part of, and what specific elements of support made the biggest biggest difference to your confidence, maybe earlier on in your trusteeship journey?
Thanks, Anj. So I've been on boards for coming on 30 years. So a lot of history. I think my very first really daunting experience was when I was living in Bangladesh. Our kids were attending an international school, and there was an opportunity for a European member parent to join the board. It was an American international school. So it was the whole process was quite daunting. There was an election speech. I had to get up on a podium and give my election pitch. But the experience, the actual on the board was interesting. Within 3 months of being on the board, I was asked whether I would take on the role of interim treasurer. Now, as someone who hasn't even got a maths GCSE, I was a bit daunted. But I was told that in the 3 months of being on the board, that I had asked questions. I had I'd shown inquisitiveness, and that was good enough at that time to take on the role of interim chair. And looking back on it, I got an enormous amount of support from the chair. I worked closely with the chair. I learned loads of technical bits of information around looking at budgets, how to present budgets confidently. So it was, I mean, the moral of the story is that, ask questions, be inquisitive, and you never know, when opportunity might knock on your door. More recently, with my experience at Ramblers, is that my experience, I think, as you mentioned, Anj, was that has largely been with local community-based organizations, quite informal. The focus is geographically quite often limited. It's around program delivery, HR, fundraising. Moving to the Ramblers, UK-wide national organization, membership of thousands. But I found what was really helpful was a robust induction program, a buddying system, which worked really well. So I had, and it just happened to be somebody who was an ex-trustee, so wasn't a current trustee. So it was a very different relationship. The papers, very detailed papers, sent out well in advance. And one of the things I think, picking up on a point that you made, Maddy, was the papers are sent in advance, in advance enough for everybody to have the opportunity to really go through the papers. And the system we have at Ramblers is that everybody is expected, if you have a question or if you have a clarification, you are expected to send those in by email at least 24 hours before the board meeting. I mean, and it does mean that you have to, as a trustee, you have to organize your time. The papers sometimes run into 100 pages. So you need to plan your time accordingly. And it also means that the agenda is often very packed. You're able to get through more on the agenda if a lot of the discussion and clarification points happen outside of the meeting. But also, as a new trustee, for me, I found that really helpful because it gave me time to understand the papers, the issues, the agenda items. And if I wasn't clear, I could ask questions outside of a meeting. So I found that the process of that really helpful. And of course, we have job descriptions. We have, within the Ramblers, it's the first time I've experienced this, there's an annual check-in with the chair and the vice chair. And I think this two-way conversation is really helpful to get feedback about how you're doing, how you're finding the process, the experience, but also to get feedback on how others perceive you in terms of how you're doing. I think I'm going to stop there. Is that I'll stop there
That
for
was
now.
great. I
Yeah.
think there were a few themes that are very pertinent, and answer one of the questions in the chat, which is, how do you feel confidence that that you're making the right decisions and doing so with reasonable skill? There are a couple of things that all of you have said. There is something around communication, so communication with other trustees and preparedness. Being prepared is very important anyway, but it is also key really for us to feel more confident in the way that we show up as trustees. So there's certainly that. And Gulshun, thanks for that contrast between a larger organisation like the Ramblers and with smaller ones. So that was also my experience being concurrently a trustee, a governor of a university, where very thick, 100 pages plus, very thick pack, and structures, compared with chairing a smaller charity with less resource in terms of staffing and time and so on, where the papers were very thin by comparison. So for those who are newer or aspiring trustees, do check in about what the pack looks like, how much time you need for preparation and so on, because all of that will just add to your confidence as a trustee. Now, for everybody here, for all of our panelists, we have another brilliant question, which is, how do you find your value add to ensure that you support and make a meaningful impact within a board that you join? So how did you find your added value? I know a couple of you have talked, like fundraising, for example. Maddy, you talked about that. So that's skills based, but what about personality based? Does anyone want to maybe share something about the unique contribution that you make? Maybe it's in terms of your personal style, your diplomacy, your listening skills, and what impact, annual reviews are great. Not everyone has them, but we have these informal conversations with trustees. So perhaps I could go around. Gulshun, I'll start with you, since you've had that more formalised approach in an annual reflection about your trusteeship, so contribution. So would you be able to go first, please?
I think, yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think when, so at some point during my trusteeship with an organisation, we didn't have a dedicated fundraiser. And so I think one of the ways in which I added value was maybe when you're when you're involved with a smaller organisation, and actually you're kind of treading that line between the governance and also getting stuck in. And I think the willingness to actually, like, I remember one of the things I did was help to implement a new fundraising pipeline that would be user friendly, and that, broadly the same version of that is what we're using a few years down the line. But I think it was that willingness to, like, I went to the office, spent time with the team, implemented a tool. And I think that's sometimes where, particularly in certain types of organizations or types of trusteeship, it's not just about reading papers and advising, but actually getting stuck in is really valuable, and people really appreciate it. And it's a nice way to have really seeing something that's kind of tangibly making a difference to the efficiency of the organisation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Maddy. Lucy, how about you?
I think I started as a kind of fundraising trustee, because when I first became a trustee, that's what I did in my day job. And as time went on, it became so much more than that. It was about my own personality, my own life experiences, and my own perspectives, and trying to ask questions in different ways. And I think encouraging my colleagues on those boards, I mean, I'm talking, it's quite 20 years ago or so now, so it's quite a long time ago, but I think I've always kind come at I've always thought about the voluntary sector as sort of, you know, I've kind of thought big picture about the charity sector, what it should be, how it should sort of stand shoulder to shoulder with the corporate sector and the public sector as not a lesser than. So I think I brought that as well, that sort of bigger perspective and that ambition for the sector in as much as for the organisations I've been trustees of. So it's I guess it's a bit like a snowball rolling down the hill. As I've gone along, I'm adding more and more of my value adds.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucy. Jack?
I think it's there's a serious answer, there's a silly answer, and we'll go for both. The serious answer is, so I'm someone who was born with autism and tries to bring that lived experience and that. I don't like the word neurodiversity, but I do think differently, and I do try and bring that to board settings, and that leads to what one of my chairs is called interesting challenge, and you can read the syntax behind that however you like. But the silly answer is I try to be funny, not telling stand-up comedy, but boards don't necessarily need to be serious. There can be big decisions, but you can enjoy each other's company. And I think if you are a group that likes working together and are more comfortable taking each other's time up and feeling that you can talk to each other out of the formal settings, you are a more effective board, and that can come from being fun to work with. I think particularly because despite the Charity Commission's effort, none of us are generally paid to be there. So it's probably a good idea to enjoy what you do. And if people don't, they are less likely to be committed.
Excellent, thank you. I can see we've had so many questions coming in. I'm going to select one or maybe two that are relevant to today's title, which is how to build your confidence on a trustee as a trustee. So this anyway follows on from our earlier conversations, and it's a question about dealing with situations where perhaps the chair isn't challenging situations that need addressing, or if not, what approach might you take? So, for example, if a trustee was overstepping into daily operations without justification, or doesn't think they need training because they've got lots of qualifications and experience, and I think particularly those of us who have been on boards for longer have seen different versions of that. I know I certainly have, and Jack, you talked about going to trustees rather than the senior management team, who, and especially if there's only one person part-time, it's not appropriate either. We're placing a lot of burden and time on someone who's already very stretched in terms of their capacity. So you know, this session is in the public domain. We're not going to give any examples that identify organisations. So maybe some general strategies about dealing with those kind of situations where the chair isn't handling something effectively. Has any of you encountered that? I can see Jack and Lucy. Jack, I'll take you. I think you just picked Lucy to the post.
I think I've had a few instances both on both sides of the table as a staff member for charities and sometimes as a trustee. I think it's so often so easy to stew on something until you reach a point where you kind of confront. And I think recognizing that generally people join the charity sector to do good, and they believe they are doing good, even if perhaps that how it manifests it's not quite our definition of good. So sometimes I've taken great value from just taking that person aside and just asking kind of, I'm seeing this, I'm not responding to that how I think you think I am. Can I ask why you're doing it that way? Is there something that we can be doing or I can be doing to help kind of provide a feedback loop? Because I think myself and other trustees aren't responding well to that, or I think our EMT or SMT are struggling to deal with those kind of questions at that moment. So you're getting behind the motivations. And I think, again, how not to be a prat, getting the title correct this time, noting, always good. But I think it is part of that, which is generally you are dealing in a sector where everyone means well, and how that manifests can be different. And sometimes just trying to analyze how that meaning well is transpiring and trying to interrogate with them how that can manifest better is a much better way than attributing malice.
I love that, and I like to go with that. You know, as just give people the benefit of the doubt first. Obviously, we have to benchmark behaviour, and if they're consistently behaving, we know that's maybe a personality trait that needs addressing rather than a one-off. Lucy, you wanted to say something as well, and maybe you can speak with that through all of your different experiences as a consultant, as a chief exec and a trustee. You know, how do we handle these sometimes challenging conversations? Are there any strategies that you advise people on?
Yeah, well, there's just on the sort of viewing people with good heart. There's a phrase I really like, which is, "We're all muddling along in a world we didn't make." So I just put that out there as quite a nice phrase. But I remember being on a board again some years ago, and nobody will be there now, that, you know, so it can't be attributed. But it was actually about the chair recruitment of a new chair, where the outgoing chair had very clear ideas of how that recruitment should take place, and in fact wanted a kind of like for like replacement, and wanted to be involved in the recruitment, and which was you know, could have been well meant but was pretty inappropriate. And the way we tackled it, we had to there were a group of us who were involved in the nominations committee who had to kind of challenge that process. So we had to kind of work out a way of navigating that decision without having a big falling out and damaging. And we worked out a better way of having a more representative panel to do that recruitment, an open recruitment process, rather than you know, somebody tapping some other mate on the shoulder sort of thing. But it was interesting because it was all of that discussion was so, you know, if it had gone in a different way, it was so against my values. And I remember sitting in this board meeting and my face apparently just went absolutely, you know, extraordinary colour, because I couldn't hide my anger at the way this conversation was going. So, but it was, you know, we navigated it well, and we had to basically go into the processes and the statutes of the charity and look at, you know, how do we do these recruitments, and use the nominations committee and challenge it through process rather than overt argument.
So that ties into, and I'm going to invite Gulshun to add something now, and then maybe Maddy. Gulshun, you did speak earlier about those structures, and I think having the structures, even within a really tiny or startup charity, can be so beneficial. Just to use some of the strategies like the one Jack mentioned about, I've observed this, I've seen this. It takes the emotion and the potential heatedness away from some situations. So are you able to add to that at all?
Not much more. But I think what I would say is that irrespective of the size of your organization, it's important that papers are quality papers, they're produced in time, they're sent out in time. But I do like the process that I've come across at Ramblers, is that if there's something you don't understand, or if you'd like more information, is to have the opportunity to ask that in advance of the meeting. And the list of questions that everybody asks is then circulated to everybody, so that is transparent, everybody sees. So it's also showing that you're not the only one that's maybe not understanding anything, or you know, or would like more information. So that maybe somebody else who's also thinking the way you're thinking. So I think it's a very, very useful, very constructive process. And you know, if I was to go on a smaller trustee board, I would want to introduce something like that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gulshun. Maddy, slightly different question for you, because you've progressed from being a trustee to chairing Oxfordshire Community Foundation. So I mean, that takes a leap of confidence. And I know that from personal experience, you know, it's all very well being on a board, but then moving to chair and actually suddenly having to have the confidence to guide those board conversations and to keep people to time and organise. What did you do to build your confidence when you were, well, I think two parts. First, when you decided to go for it, and second, now that you're doing it, you know, how have you maintained your confidence and how was that maybe built?
Thank you. Yes, so it's chairing the grants committee and not the whole board, so it's a little bit less daunting. But I think part of it is one thing I've learned from being a trustee, but also from work, I suppose, is that actually things only become more comfortable if you do go out of the comfort zone and kind of get used to that slightly new space. So it's kind of a bit of an attitude shift of okay, I know this is actually going to be a bit tricky. I know I'm going to worry about this. I know I'm going to feel nervous. But actually, once I've done it a couple of times, I'll probably be okay. And actually, there's, you know, evidence for me being able to do this in terms of, you know, I think your point there around sticking to times, like, yeah, I think putting structures in place, it's that preparation piece again, I think, around, right, I'm going to make sure that I know what the purpose of the meeting is. I'm going to make sure I'm prepared with papers. I'm going to make sure that anybody else who's, you know, presenting, that we're all looped in. And I was really fortunate because the person who was chairing that committee before is still involved with the charity. So I could also talk to them about, you know, what's your experience of this been? Are there any things to look out for? You know, where can this derail, or what can I do that's going to be effective? And I think it's partly, yeah, that consciousness that it's okay for something to feel a bit daunting and a bit difficult, but actually it's probably going to be okay, and trying to actually enjoy it. And I think it's something too about when you are a trustee and you're really passionate about the cause, I think it makes it a little bit easier to do some of those challenging things sometimes. And I think it kind of relates to some of the conversation we've had about the challenging conversations too, that actually sometimes you are sat there thinking, oh, this is, you know, I could just be having a chilled evening, and here I am with kind of something that feels quite difficult. But then you remember, you know, why you're connected to the charity and this duty that we have of doing what's in the best interests. And I think that doing what's in the best interests really helps me ground myself sometimes and thinking, you know, this might be a bit hard, but actually that's what you're here for. And sometimes it's not always going to be easy to, you know, be a trustee.
Yeah. And speaking of which, gosh, we have a scenario in the chat. Well, we have several questions, but there's one in particular which is a real challenge, and I will speak to this from my own perspective as well, which is, how do you influence the board to review those structures? So this is really about those challenging conversations, and for newer trustees. I'm a relatively new trustee. In my first role, our articles, etc., don't seem to be very helpful. Our chair has been enrolled for 20 plus years, has no intention of moving on or stepping down. We have a few trustees who have been in place a similar amount of time and who don't always attend meetings, etc. I know this isn't good practice, but there's nothing in our processes that say this can't happen. I've tried raising concerns, but it's a bit of an old boys club, and I can't seem to get myself or my concerns to be taken seriously. There's so much in there, and again, unfortunately, this happens. And how, you know, what are the levers? And I would love to hear from all of our panelists. We've got about 10 minutes before we need to wrap up, and I think that there are a few more questions I've got for you, but there are a couple of things there from my perspective, and one would be on what are the points in the agenda, or like the AGM or other key points in the year where you might be able to flag some of these things up and have your voice heard, or suggest some changes to the policies that can then give you a tool to have those kind of conversations. So that's one thing, and our panel might want to speak to that. Maybe they've got experience of it. It's quite hard retrospectively to implement those policies and processes. And the other side of that coin to me, and which is what I want to talk to all of you about on difference and diversity, is coming back to that point of psychological safety. Sometimes we have to accept that we are long-term volunteers, but we can't fundamentally make a change within that organisation. And is it right for us to stay, or do we actually need to move on and find a role where we can make a contribution? That's something that isn't spoken much about in arenas like this. And I feel it's an important point for trustees to have that confidence, again, confidence, to say, this just isn't working out and I can't make that change and I'm feeling depleted or lacking energy now. So panel, passing my reflections back to you. Jack again, I can see Jack, Maddy, Jack, Lucy, Gulshun, and then Maddy. So a couple of minutes from each of you, if you will, on that point. So it's quite a long question. You can see it there in the chat, but what do you do when you've got a chair that's not going to move on and their buddies are in place and they're not behaving very well and not really doing their discharging their trustee responsibilities? What would you suggest?
I think it's particularly hard in a context like this, because if it's something simple like safeguarding or big, there are regulatory processes.
Yeah.
I think often when you're talking about something like this, it's taking it off their ground and taking it out of their voices. So we've had it before with discussions on funding diversification, where kind of I did the research and found multiple reports, brought in multiple voices, whether it was from the Charity Commission or other industry bodies, and then presented it in a format that I knew the chair couldn't make it a 2-minute agenda item in AOB, sending it round everyone and saying, I'd like this specifically added to the agenda. It means you are kind of taking it off their turf, and generally people who are 20+ year chairs are comfortable dominating a room and not taking into their space or your space. So I think just taking it on your terms and saying, this is the voice, and reaching a point where you can be confident of, I might have failed, but I did everything. And then recognizing perhaps that's all you can do. And there's probably a better charity out there for you to give your expertise and experience to.
Absolutely brilliant advice. So using whatever influencing levers you have to see what you can facilitate in terms of change, but then making that decision if ultimately you don't believe that change can be made. Thanks, Jack. Lucy.
I was thinking about Charity Commission and kind of sector guidance on terms of office for trustees. So there's I was trying to quickly look, and I think there probably is guidance out there which you could find a way of referring to or bringing to attention of the board. The other point I was thinking about was whether there are, is it genuinely kind of one person on their own and everybody else is in the old boys club, or are there other potential allies that you may have around you? So I think going back to that safety point, it will be very difficult if you're the only person trying to raise this. And I would, you know, I would find that difficult myself, even at these great old age. So it's really thinking through, you know, can you do that on your own, or are there some allies? Is there some external guidance you could be referring? Because that charity is presumably running some risk if they're out of kilter with, you know, what you know, good, well-run charities are doing. So those would be my thoughts.
Yeah, and I can see the chat is quite busy, and there are various bits of guidance, but sometimes we know that ego, and one of you alluded to this right away, one of the key attributes for being an effective trustee is humility, but sometimes that ego gets in the way. And so even though the guidance is out there, that influencing is quite difficult to do, because people will dig their heels in, because and they know that they're not obliged necessarily to take on that guidance. So brilliant points, Lucy. Thank you. Gulshun, what would you like to add?
Yes, I agree with Lucy. Trying to find allies within the board as really important that you're not the only one who's feeling like this. And maybe if you speak to people, you may find that you are not the only one, that there might be allies, potential allies within the wider group. Yeah, the bottom line is use the governance structure, AGMs or general council meetings. And if that fails because the organization may be too small or that's not possible. I've been in a situation long time ago where I went to the donors. There was a similar situation of nepotism within the organization in terms of recruitment, and a chair that wouldn't get off his chair. Yeah, speak to the donors. And the Charity Commission now. I mean, I think the Charities Commission now are much more on the ball than they were 30 years ago. So
yeah, certainly. Thank you. Maddy.
Yeah, I think the allies point was springing to mind as well, especially when, if it's got that kind of dynamic, it could be difficult for other people to speak up if they're also feeling the same thing. So trying to suss that out. But I suppose, weighing up whether it is something you can stick with and whether you want to be part of that change, or whether it's going to be, too much. I think there's also maybe in some of these situations the opportunity to consider, actually, is there an opportunity to bring more board members in who could help kind of diffuse that, particularly that old boys club vibe. That can be, if there's a few different trustees coming in who are bringing diversity to that board, bringing different perspectives, that could potentially be a way of, if you haven't got allies already, potentially generating some.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My goodness, I have so many more questions I would love to ask each of you, but all we really have time for now is a question for each of you, maybe a minute or so each, if you would, on as we close, what one piece of advice would you give to somebody who is struggling as a new trustee? So is there anything that you would like to say to them, or anything that you've experienced that's helped you? I will start with Jack.
I think it's the thing that helped me was a lovely mentor taking me aside after my second meeting, I think, where my nerves kept getting in front of me. And he said, the only point you made a decision was when you wanted to apply. We made the rest of them and we wanted you. And that helped enormously. And I think it's still true for every board. It might take a bit of nerves and cringe to put yourself forward, particularly when you see an impressive board and you want to join. But after that, they're equally, if not more, culpable for you, and they wanted you and they want to hear your voice, and so be you.
Absolutely love that. My experience also. Thank you, Jack. Lucy, how about you?
Sort of to build on that, really, that you've been recruited perhaps for a skill or a perspective or a knowledge that you've got, and start with that. Remember that you know more than you think, you know more than maybe the others do about that thing. So for me, that was fundraising. And so when I first started, I was everybody looked to me to know everything about fundraising, even though I didn't. And then I built from there. I started to get more confident about financial management and, budget planning and all of the other aspects. But, so I suppose, you do know more than you think would be my words.
Excellent. Thank you, Lucy. Gulshun.
I agree with Lucy. I mean, increasingly organizations advertise for trustees with a particular skill set. So don't forget why you were recruited in the first place. The other point I would make is that you, as a trustee, you also have responsibility to be proactive in your own learning. So look what's out there. Obviously, the organisation is responsible for supporting you as well, but you also have a responsibility to access external resources, whether it's the Charities Commission training or other organisations like Eastside People.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and great plug for Eastside People. Maddy, last but not least, very quickly.
I would say try not to leave meetings and instantly start ruminating on what you did that might have been silly or embarrassing, and instead try and credit yourself for the things that you did well and where you contributed, and yeah, kind of not hold yourself up to perfection.
Oh, brilliant. Well done. Thank you so much to our panel. I love that diversity of voices that we had. We're a model board right here. Penny, going to hand back to you now. Thank you so much for everyone who listened. I hope you enjoyed the series of workshops and today's webinar too. And I'll be handing back to Penny right now.
Thank
Have
you.
a great evening.
Thank you, Anj, Jack, Lucy, Gulshun and Maddy. That was really encouraging. Thank you so much. And some brilliant attendee questions, really getting to the heart of what being a trustee is all about. Apologies for the inadvertent swear word. We're going to bleep it out in the recording. I've already been lining that up during the session. Jack doesn't need to feel bad. It happens to the best of us. When you log off this session, you may know, because you may already have been to festival sessions, you get a quick poll that asks you what you thought of it. Please do let us know. We pore over those. And then a bit of final housekeeping. Please do follow Eastside People on LinkedIn. Thank you for the plug. And do please follow our LinkedIn newsletters. I've put the links in the chat. And there's lots of support available for Eastside People. We recruit trustees. So if you're an aspiring trustee, do sign up for our vacancies. If you are already a trustee or a member of staff within a charity, Eastside People offers board training, good governance, board effectiveness reviews, succession planning, trustee recruitment, other sorts of recruitment, and much more. So please do check us out. We've got just 2 sessions left of the Festival of Trusteeship. Tomorrow at 12:30, we've got Strategy That Sticks, Tips for Trustees. And at 4:30, we've got our closing session, which is How Not to Be a Prat on a Board. Jack, please take note of the word. Thank you. So thank you all very much for coming. I hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.